Hello, BookTube. A little while ago, last year, David Wiley of the BookTube channel David Wiley, Indispensable Viewing, it created a template for videos that really unites us all. It'd be one thing if he'd created a template that was best Star Trek novels, because some of you are misguided enough morally and spiritually so that you don't have any Star Trek novels. But he didn't do that. Instead, he created a template for videos that applies to every book reader that I've ever known, which is Bookshelf Essentials. Which I'm sure in an idealized version we would all like to say is all that we have. All that we have are essentials. But you know that's not true. When it comes to buying books, our eyes are always bigger than our stomach. We hoover stuff up. I did so just today myself. And not all of that stuff stays. And over time, you develop a core of a library. It can be very big, it can be very small, but a core of a library where you know for sure that you got keepers. You go back to them all the time. They make you, even if you don't go back to them all the time, having them really pleases you in a way that having all your other books does not. When it comes to my Bookshelf Essentials, one of the yardsticks really is that I do go back to it. It's really no good to me to have a book on the shelf that I walk by every 10 years and say, boy, I'm glad I have you. That really doesn't do it for me. I really need to go back to the book, in whole or in part, often. And that is true for the Bookshelf Essential that I'm picking today, which is from 1990 with a new preface in a couple of years later by a British journalist and historian that I just love. I've praised him on this channel many, many times. I have all of his collections of occasional work. He was, I'm assuming he's dead, but he was, in addition to being an author, he was also a jobbing book critic. So if somebody said to him, a friend of his on Fleet Street said, I've got 1,000 words of begging in The Guardian, and I'd love it if you would write about the new book on Princess Diana. Or there's a new biography of Queen Elizabeth II. Could you write that up for me? And, I'll put 100 bob in the mail to you sometime, 2 years from now, something like that. As I've said many times on this channel, that might not sound like much to you. It might sound really random and extremely poorly paid for the work that goes into it. Hello? But nevertheless, as I've mentioned many times on this channel, once you've done that, you don't ever not do it. No matter what. You can win a Nobel Prize. And if some ragged old book editor, a friend of yours, says, hey, could you give me 100 words or 500 words on this new novel? You'll consider it. You'll probably do it. You'll probably do it. Even though the money now for you is nothing. That reflex comes from a time when the money was everything. When the money was everything, and also seeing your name out there, getting in these conversations. Once you've done that, you don't ever stop doing that. And if you've got an aptitude for it, you should try it. You don't know. You might try it and be the exception. When I say you keep doing it, I mean generally speaking. Of course, there are people who don't do it. There are people who do it to break in because what they really want to do is write dumb, pretentious novels. But a lot of people, especially the ones that go into it without any high romance, love it so much that they keep doing it. And if you've got a penchant for that sort of thing, you should give it a try. I could name 5 people on BookTube right now who should definitely give it a try. I don't say that your lot will be to become a broken down old book critic on a fainting couch with a bossy schnauzer. I don't say that at all. But I do say you might end up loving it. But anyway, that's a subject for another video. The point is that the author here is David Carradine, and I believe that he did love it. His collections of occasional prose were exactly that. Royal biographies, historical reviews, that sort of thing. I wish, maybe there is in the UK, but I wish in the US there were a huge doorstop volume of his collected reviews. Because they're wonderful. They are absolutely wonderful. But he also wrote serious books. And the most serious one of all, the masterpiece of his entire writing career, is my Bookshelf Essential for today. It is The Decline and Fall of the British Aristocracy. And this lovely, this lovely vintage paperback that I got. I had the big, fat hardcover of this thing in the U.S. The U.S. hardcover has a terrible cover and was big and heavy. And I had that for a while, and then I got paperbacks, and then this thing came out. This paperback came out in the early 1990s here in the U.S., and I thought it was so pretty that I grabbed it and read the first one of these to extinction. Then I got a second copy, read it until it was fairly weathered around the edges, and then sent it to somebody. So I'm now on my third copy of this thing. And this is, it's not a history of the British aristocracy. It's a history of the waning days of the British aristocracy. And you might say, especially if you live in the UK, you might say, what do you mean waning days? They're still all over the place. But what Kennedy means is when they were powerful, when they ruled not only the country, but an empire, the biggest, grandest empire the world had ever seen. That's his subject. So what we're talking about here is from the mid-19th century through the rest of the 19th century, limping along. There were massive reform bills that went through in the late 19th century. There was expanded enfranchisement in the 19th century that dealt really serious blows. So, you're reeling and you're bobbing around. Typically, if you ask somebody what did in the British aristocracy as a landed power, as a power base in the country, typically those people will say World War I, when a whole generation of their sons died. But Kennedy proves that isn't really true. That this process of decline was well underway before World War I. Enfranchisement, the gigantic increase in industrialization, meaning a gigantic increase in people who didn't need you in order to work, didn't need to be part of your estates in order to work, and so on and so forth. A whole bunch of stuff like that. Plus, in the late 19th century, the centralization of government powers in London started to take a look at powers elsewhere in the country. What are these powers elsewhere in the country? And how much money are they making? And how much authority do they have? And that started to spread. That state work started to spread its tentacles into every little borough everywhere, far, far away on the Welsh border, even. As Kennedy points out over and over again in this book, is a classic insight of his that is so good, one of the million classic insights in this book. It was bureaucracy that killed the aristocracy. Not anything else. Not anything more grand or more romantic, but bureaucracy. But he spends a bulk of this book, probably the first third, maybe more, describing in glorious detail the absolute heyday of what its members did not realize was perhaps the most privileged group of people ever in Western society. These were people who, for a long time at the beginning of this book, exist without any kinds of taxes. They are absolute lords of their domain. We're talking lords and ladies here, where the Duke or the Earl is also the justice of the peace in his county. He is not appealable. He's the law. He can break you, put you out of business, put you in jail, execute you. Also, a lot of these figures, at the early part of this book, maintain armies of their own. They don't call them that, and they don't register them that way, but it's a huge amount. A lot of them, in other words, are living lives on their properties that would have been recognizable, maybe not in every detail, but certainly in the broader details, to the great royalty of Tudor times. The great aristocracy of Tudor times would have recognized. They would have said, more is the same here than is different. Well, by the 1880s, that was very much not true anymore. And it just continued to stop being true. So this is the decline and fall aspect here is wonderfully done. There are 2 points that I want to make about this, and main points that I want to make about it. I could talk about it forever. I've gone back to this book so many times. And part of it is a personal connection, because I have known some of the families involved here, and I've been in a lot of the palatial country estates here with my dogs. So I know the look of this thing. I've woken up in these houses. I've had breakfast in these places. So I was never quite invited to the balls and the gala dinners at night. That never really worked. I don't clean up at all. And, it's not like I was pining. I was a quarter of a mile down the hill in the kennels. and I was as happy as could be. But the 2 points that I want to make about this book, mainly for this Bookshelf Essentials, I don't want this to be 40 minutes. My Bookshelf Essentials are not going to start being 40-minute videos, are both connected. One is that Kennedy can't repress himself. He is such a good writer, such a human writer, so schooled in pleasing the reader, which is certainly a skill that you will develop if you start in journalism. You can get it in other ways, but you'll definitely get it there. That he centers a huge amount of this book on personalities. I don't know if you're going to be able to make it out here, but this book is, it's full of illustrations. They're all over the book. You get tons and tons of period costumes, Hercules and the farmer there. But you also get, here we go, portraits of virtually every member, leading member of the aristocracy, families and lineages, and just all through the book. And he makes this a parade of personalities very intentionally to keep it readable. And the result is the second thing I want to say about this, which is that, believe it or not, despite it being a gigantic, how long is this? 600 pages? 800 pages. Despite being a gigantic history of the decline and fall of the landed aristocracy in the UK, this is fantastically readable. It's just fantastically readable. And there's an inherent background drama to all of this. Yes, you get the individual stories, and you get the broader sweeps of history, because Kennedy is always keeping one eye trained on what factors are causing this decline and fall. You get all of that. But there's the drama in the background is that you know how it's going to turn out. You know a couple of things that are coming that this glittering crowd don't know. For all their foresightedness, they don't know it. They don't know the World War I is coming, first of all. They don't have any idea about that, and that they will either send their sons and younger sons to the front, or those sons and younger sons will go without their permission and die. They don't know that. But they also don't know, they don't really believe, right until the end of this book, you have people that don't really believe that these massive reform bills, that increased suffrage, that increased work, increased industrialization is really going to upend their lives. And a lot of them, right up until about the halfway point in this book, steadfastly believe they will never be taxed for anything. And you know that it's not true. It's impossible for me to read this book without thinking of Brideshead Revisited. And Brideshead Revisited opens with a perfect illustration of what's waiting for these people. The opening scenes in Brideshead Revisited are a World War II army company barracking in a palatial country estate that's been all knocked about by, troops and practice shell fire and whatnot. Brideshead, the estate, was once unbelievably grand. And it isn't when we meet it. We have to go back in time to see it grand, but it isn't when we meet it. And that fate, that sort of mud-stained fate, is waiting for almost all of these people. They're either going to, in almost all cases, they're either going to break out completely, just get busted, or they're going to sell up to the National Trust and maybe live as tenants in what used to be their own homes until they die out. They will be wholly owned by the National Trust. You know that's coming, which gives this, to use a book reviewer term, a lambent light to it that is just wonderful. Just wonderful. I cannot imagine this subject being better done. I always go back to this book. Any of you who have been here at High Cottage will know I have a whole wall of bookcases devoted to history. But this one tends to be in the little book room. Almost always. I want it nearby in case I want to check up on somebody. In the books that I read, in the histories that I read, some of these people's names come up. I want to go right away and remind myself what Kennedy said about them. And also just the drama of it. Sometimes, I'm sure that this year I will reread this from start to finish. So, there you go. It's a bookshelf essential that's a work of history. But believe it or not, it's terrific. So that's why it's an essential. So there you go. I'm going to wrap this up for now. I'll try to make my bookshelf essential next time a little more accessible. Thank you, BookTube.